Hey guys, Bazzy here. I've been working on a project to teach others how to print their own orthotics. I wanted to share by showing a way that uses free software and simple tools just to make one real. Mind you, while these orthotics' intent is to be 3D printed, it does not replace a professional's help, and while it might work for me, a person who's already gone to a podiatrist, it may not work for you. On top of that, mine is based on an existing orthotic that has already been made professionally, and I'm just recreating it. So it doesn't cost me an arm and leg, and because I'm probably going to wear them out. I worked on a workplace, or I currently work at a workplace where it wears out my boots pretty fast and orthotics faster, so I decided to create this solution. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is learning just how to use the UI. So in here you've got your main viewport, you've got your object in the center, and you've got your camera and your light. So the first thing that we're going to learn how to do is we're going to learn how to pan around the screen. So when you press your middle mouse button in, so your scroll wheel, you will be able to move your screen around pretty damn easily. Next thing is you can click and drag over something to select it, and then if you press the full stop button on your number pad, you can focus onto its origin point, which is this little orange dot here. Now if you press shift while using the middle click button, you can also pan the screen left and right. And this is your main tools for getting around the viewport. You can practically move yourself anywhere you want. But that combined with the full stop button will practically reset you to any point you want. And if you don't like the current controls that you're using, you can always go into the file path and use an industry standard like Myers or something similar. But for what I'm doing here and the way I'm going to say the keys and stuff, I'm going to be using Blender's defaults, because Blender's defaults are quicker and the hotkeys are quicker. So here we have our cube, and here you can rotate around and you can pan. You can select an object by clicking on it, and then you can use your focus key, so your full stop, to just zoom straight onto that object. Allows you to orbit really easily. That's what when I mean the full stop key, I mean the one on the number pad. This is the one that on the main keyboard does, and it's not relevant. We just want to be using the numpad. The numpad's very important for everything in Blender to basically reorientate the camera, focus, or basically most of the camera tools are used with the number pad. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do, so the next part that we're going to learn is how to lock camera to certain angles. And the reason you want to do this is that it gives you a better perspective of what you're looking at. So right there, I just pressed numpad 1, and it would lock us to the front view. And if you're having trouble trying to figure out where you are, just look where the camera is or where other objects are. If I press 3, I get the side view. And if I press 1, I'm back to the front view. And you can switch between them really easily just by pressing 1 and 3. Now you can also go to top view, which is by pressing 7. And you can switch between them pretty easily. And while normal softwares typically have like a split layout where you can see where everything is in multiple different panels, I don't think it really works very well for Blender. It's not really something that works. So the next thing we're going to do is press A and then X and then delete the entire scene, because we don't need that stuff at all. So the next thing we want to do is we want to import our image in. So go down to Image, go to Reference, and then find where your file is located. So the next thing I'm going to probably do is copy the file path of where this is in case it doesn't come back here, and then I'm going to add my images in. So as you can see, there's a bunch of images of each and every side. So here's the first image, and we're not going to move it quite yet. We'll worry about that stuff later. What we're going to do first is just keep re-importing in next and every image. Luckily it seems to have saved the file path. So that's 2 of them. Let's add in our third. The top view. Let's add in our 4th. Our bottom view. The bottom one's not as important, but it's still good to have. Now, these are a little glitched into each other, but that is perfectly fine. As long as we can select them, and we'll just move them apart of each other, just so that we can select them, individually easier. But that's alright. So, the next thing that we want to do is press the N for the what's called editing panel, which will give you a bunch of options down the side here, and we're going to go down to item. So what we can do is on the right of the screen there is a panel, which I just call the N panel because it's just easy to say. And in this N panel there is a little drop down box that actually gives you the values of the rotation. If you click and drag downwards, you can actually select multiple values, and if you write 0 in, it immediately zeroes out its position. And this is the easiest way to use like an image file or something, is just to re-zero it out. Because when you import the image, it's actually based off the rotation of the camera, which is quite annoying, so we just have to keep zeroing out the image. You might not get this funky camera, like stacked images like this, if you were to have imported it all from the same angle, and you might get images that are clipping into each other. So what I'm going to show you here is if you wanted to move something up and downwards, you look up to the top right and you can see that the z-axis is up and down. So what you can do is press G and then Z, and it binds the grab, which is what G is, to the z-axis. Then it means that it is perfectly moved downwards, and because of the way the orthographic view works, it will still be the same scale, even if it's, different. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do this to all of these pieces. So the next piece is the bottom piece. We're going to go into it. We're going to zero out this thing as well. So click and drag on the top value to the bottom one and write in 0. We'll copy all the values down and it will be now be zeroed out. And due to the fact that the way this orthotic works is that the bottom image, when you're going to be looking at it to sculpt or base off it, it needs to be above the model because you're looking at it from the bottom angle. So we're going to move this orthotic image upwards to the top by pressing G and then Z and then moving it upwards. So that should be pretty good. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the image is hidden, and we do that by pressing H on it. And also, if you want to bring it back, you can press Alt H, or in the case that you don't want to unhide everything, which is what Alt H does, you can come up to the outline here, and it will have a little eye next to it, which is the visibility option. So next thing that we're going to be doing is moving out these other ones, but we need to figure out which side, as in where it is. So which side is left and which side is the right side. So the easiest way of doing this is just to zero out one of them, and we'll just use this one here first, and we'll go down right under 0. It will make it flat, which means that we need to now rotate it to be on the correct axis, because obviously you can't work with the side view of something if it's up and down. So we press R, and then we press X, and then we rotate it on that axis. And depending on how you imported your images or what images you're using, you may have to use a different axis. So X, Y, and Z all will change the rotation point. And as you can see up the top right here, it actually is manipulating that value that we had zeroed out previously. But that's all good. So first off, we're going to write in 90 using the keypad, and then you realize that it's perfectly on a side view, and it's perfectly 90 degrees. So the good thing about Blender is that if you write in a number, like 90, when you're pressing rotate, it will perfectly rotate it by that degrees while you're like rotating that said image. So that's awesome. So the first thing we want to do is we want to figure out the curve of this object to try and figure out which is which. So one easy way of doing this is to just look at the arch of the foot and to see how it would line up with the bottom image. We're not going to use the top one too much, but yeah. Basically we're going to use that high arch point to dictate where it is in the scene. So this one, we're going to rotate it, and we're going to press the Z-axis, and then write in our 90. There we go. The next thing we need to do is we need to now move this object out of our way so that it's perfectly lined up. But basically for the orthograph, you can see it, but it won't be in the way of our modeling. So if we press 3, notice that we go locked to the side view, and we can perfectly see the orthotic piece. So we're going to do the same thing with this one, and we can zero out this value. Then we're going to press R for rotate it on the x-axis. Then we're going to rotate it again on the y-axis and run in 90. And then we're going to move this back over so that it's out of our way towards where the camera currently is. So we press G and then X, and then move it over on this axis. So we're all good here. And of course you can move it to anywhere you really want, but anyway, so the first thing we're going to do is hide the top image so it doesn't get in the way while we're trying to model. And of course these images, they have two sides, so it's not really too much of a problem. So we zoom into the top. Well, I'm totally going to have to recreate that entire start portion, but anyway. So now that we've got this top angle, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be outlining this object, and due to the fact that I know how large my own foot is, which is roughly 28 centimeters long, and I'm like a 11 and a half, kind of around that area in terms of foot size. So it means that when I'm creating this object, I'm going to try and keep it to scale as much as possible, but it doesn't actually matter too much. Now, I have an existing model already that I've already made, so I will have something that I can go back to. And ignore this part here, so don't bother following along. If I go to my asset browser, go unsigned, and get one of my orthos. This is what we'll be turning it into, which, as you can tell, is pretty damn close to what you want. Now, this design does not actually matter too much. Like, for instance, the brim of this is quite thick. It's not absorbently problematic if it's not exact. The other stuff on this could be, you know, stuff that's worked out later on in the 3D printing process, like thickness of walls, and depending on the plastics, you might have to have certain thicknesses of portions. Like, for instance, the tops of mine here, they are a single. They aren't like, they're a single vertices basically. They're not, you normally when you're modeling something to be printed, you'd have like a thickness boundary or something. Like, this is not something that you're going to be worrying about. So let me delete that and turn you back into an outliner. So, how do you start with an outline? So, we're going to be using a process called subdiv modeling. And it is pretty standard now in Blender as a quick and easy, cheap way to model something. So subdivision is basically a way of smoothing over an object, and when you're 3D printing something, it needs to be very smooth, and not in the smooth sort of way that normal people would hear when you talk about smooth faces or something like this. Not this sort of way where you can have smooth normals between surfaces. We're talking about actual geometric smoothness, because we'll be shading things flat. So, first thing we need to do is we need to know how to add something to the scene. So, when you added an image, you press Shift A and you add an image, right? That's how you did your reference. Now, instead of pressing that, you come in and you press cube. See, that's something you could do, but me, I'm going to be lazy. We're going to be using a plane. So, in general, the simpler you start off with, like at the start, the easier it is later on. There's less geometric detail that you have to be screwing around with. So, the first thing that we want to be doing is we want to create the outline of the actual top. So, this here. So, all around here. All around here. And yes, you could take measurements of depth and blah 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 of your orthotic or another orthotic. It doesn't have to be specifically my one. The only reason I'm using this one is because it's a perfect reference and I took some pretty alright photos. So, the first thing that you want to do is make sure in your 7 menu for pressing, for looking down at the object, and you press Tab. So, Tab puts you in and out of edit mode. Tab is pretty essential to anything in Blender because it moves you between your two previous workspaces, and these are your workspaces inside of the object editor. So you've got object mode, you've got your edit mode, you've got sculpt, vertex, weight, and texture. The only modes that it will be using for this will be sculpt, edit, and object. The other ones, while I will be doing vertex editing, that won't be done in the sculpting. Though it could be, but I won't be. So, first thing we want to do is we want to get the right shape for this orthotic. So, if you press Ctrl and R, you will create a thing called a loop cut. And now, a loop cut literally will just follow the edge of like flat face to flat face perfectly. So even if there is, just say you click and add your loop cut, even if there's something obscuring it, it will always follow edge flow. So this here. So I'll control escape and then control Z that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make this object the same size. So you always start with your basic, which is your square here, and you're going to click and drag over these faces here. G, then press Y, and move it up to the very top of the orthotic. Then you want to click and drag over these faces here. G, and then Y, and move it to the very base of the orthotic. And you might be thinking, unless I have a robot for a foot, this doesn't seem right. So we're going to turn off this setting up here called toggle X-ray, and it's your transparency, and it makes whatever object you're currently editing transparent, which means if you're looking in other views, you can still see things through it, unlike what normally would happen when it's turned off, which is where it obscure and obstruct exactly what you're looking at. This is perfect when you're trying to model an outline of something. And yes, you can also go into wireframe mode, which up here is your different modes. You have wireframe, that's your material. Okay, normal, that's your material, that's your rendered. Rendered isn't going to be useful until the very latest setting. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is back to your object, back to transparent, 7, looking down at it. So, right now, we have a total of 4 vertices to work with. As you can probably imagine, that's not very accurate. So, the first thing that we want to do is we want to add some loop cuts. These loop cuts will then be used to stretch to conform to the shape of this orthotic. So I'm going to press Ctrl R again to bring up my loop cuts. You'll see that the loop cuts will, even though the object has been warped and changed, it'll still be constrained to it. So, when you put your cursor over this, and without clicking or anything, scroll upwards, and it will add a multitude of loop cuts. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put in, 5 loop cuts to start off with. It will give you an option to slide them up and down, and then what you want to do is press right click. Right click will cancel that action, but not cancel the loop cuts. So, now what we're going to do is we're going to move these to the exact shape of the top of this orthotic. So, up here, you go to your settings, you can go to tweak if you want, which will give you, basically if you click and hold down this, it will give you a multitude of options. So this includes a selection box, a select circle, and a lasso. The circle, of course, means that you can click and hold and select multiple things just by moving around them. Your box is what I use the most because it's the most useful. And that's just obviously selecting parts and then it deselects others. And then you've got your selection lasso, which is helpful, but mostly not. And tweak just moves it immediately. Doesn't give you a selection box, it only tweaks the specific things that are already pre-selected. So, you want to get this vertex to be lined up perfectly with this part here. How do you go about that? Go back to your box selector, click and drag over it, G, and X. Move it exactly on top of it. You don't have to zoom that far in because it ain't that deep. So, this here will look incorrect for now, and I'll show you how to fix that soon, but that doesn't matter. Then we're going to go here, G, X, and move it towards the shape. Now you might say, but there is a bunch of geometry that's just hanging out. Well, so not geometry, part of the image that's hanging out, and that my geometry is not reaching it. It's not a problem. It's stuff that will get fixed later. So click and drag over that, G, X, up, and then you see there, I forgot to deselect something, so I'm dragging everything with me. So, if you ever want to deselect something, you just click and drag over the new area again. Or, click off the entire object and it will deselect it. So click and drag over, G, X, doink. That one's correctly lined up purely by coincidence. So that's not going to be a problem. So click and select over it because it deselects that part up the top. Drag it over, it's over it. G and X. 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 And then now we just have to handle out the bottoms. So, let's look at this object from another angle. Yeah, it doesn't exactly look much like orthotic, but we're getting there. So, Blender is something that uses modifiers as a way to create something. And what is a modifier? It's literally just non-destructive ways of editing a mesh. So, for instance, we've got in our modifiers tab, down here is your like render tab, your scene, your view layers, blah 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 blah. That's what all this is here. Click on the little blue wrench, add a modifier. It'll come up with a add modifier search thing. You click and hit solid, and up will come up a thing called a solidify. This is called a solidify modifier. This is a way to add thickness to something that doesn't exist. That doesn't affect the base mesh. So for instance, if I turn the screen to the side now, you see that there's a slight bit of thickness to this, which we can of course increase. And it's looking a little bit more like an orthotic now. So, press 7, back over it, and now we need to solve the fun problem of the top of this orthotic. So, before we do anything, we need to add another modifier called of course you press this to drop down and close the boxes. We need to add another modifier called a subsurf, which is what I was talking about before. So sub, and it will always be the first one because it's subdivision surface. Now, you'll notice something peculiar has happened, and if we turn off our X-ray for a moment, it gives us this funny looking loaf, which is obviously incorrect. Doesn't look right. To fix this, what we can do is bring our subsurf up. It's a little textured icon that lets you move your subsurf. So it basically is an order of priority, and the thing that's at the top is your highest priority. So right now, it doesn't quite look right still. So press 7. We're going to increase the viewport level. Because this mesh is going to be a very high quality one, we want to go up to 3. So one way is you can click and drag down and write 3. And later on we may increase its subdivision depending on how much detail we want to squeeze out of this model. So, turn on the X-ray mode again. You'll notice that the orthotic isn't even remotely lining up anymore. In fact, some areas like here have actually stretched back in. That's due to the way that subdivision works, is that it's not a perfect science, and it will change the shape of the model by basically removing out details that are more sharp compared to other things. It's like a smoothing tool. So, if we go up to the top here, and click and drag on this, and press G, but don't constrain it to an axis, we actually get options to move the orthotic piece around. See, as you can tell, that looks a lot nicer and more organic looking. So let's move it, just say there, G, G. So if you want to confirm an action, you just click. And if you don't like an action, like you put it out here, if you start to put it out here, sorry, press right click and it immediately snaps it back to where it's supposed to be. So this right here, you can tell how it's being ugly. That's because this one here is also out of whack. So what we can do is limit this on the axes again and bring it out. This is a part where you might have to do a little bit of fiddling. Now these may end up getting changed in the future anyway, so it's not as I said, it's not a perfect science for now. Let's realign all these as best as we can. Okay, see how that's screwing it up? Okay, so we're faced with a problem here, which is no matter how we move this, realistically, we're not going to be able to get it into a perfect shape. So what we can do is just add another loop cut. So Control R and then click, and it will create your loop cut. We can move this in, we can move this in, move that out, move this in. It's like a connect the dots, just a lot more complicated. Move this in, scale it in a little. Oh yeah, so if you want to scale something in, so just say you have two things that are far apart from each other and you want them close towards each other, another thing you can do is press S and it will scale it. So it just changes the scale based on the 2 points. So I can scale these in a little bit instead of independently moving them. these ones, I'm going to scale them back out a little. And now we're starting to get a more defined shape if we move out of that screen. That so far is looking great. You can even increase your subdivision amount, and you can see that it will get rid of those polygonal lines, but for the sake of just performance in the viewport, it's not worth it. So back to this. Now, what does this look like from different angles? So if we press 3 and look at our side view, we don't see anything, and that's because the object is actually a 2D object that's being extruded downwards to give it depth. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it back to a solid by turning off the X-ray, editing out of tab mode. Oh. Right now, what's happening is that this object is actually getting in the way. So what we're going to do, see if I press 3, you can tell that if you zoom out, you can tell that this object is getting in the way of this one, preventing us from being able to see it properly. So what we can do to fix that is press on this and press hide. So H for hide. As I said before, it's up here, so you can just bring it back into existence and snuff it. So go back to 3, we have our object. Now notice how even though we perfectly lined up with this image, the side view is not perfect, and that's because I'm not a perfect photographer. I try my best to try and take as many consistent flat photos as possible, but I can't do it perfectly. I'm not perfect at it. So what you need to do is you need to scale this image to fit with it. Luckily, my photo is pretty damn good, so that's about there. And as with the moving tools, I'm going to move it a little bit. And there we go. So now this is basically a perfect side view. Now, you may say, well, the top is arched and curved like that. Yep, that's something we're going to be fixing. So let's begin on that now then. So the solidify modifier has a problem where it's going to be a consistent thickness, which is going to be 0.27 meters. So 27 centimeters thick right now. So this is a pretty big object. We'll worry about scale and stuff later, but for now it's very big. So we want to press 3, and we're probably going to turn off the modifier, and we're going to work on the top of this object first. So solidify doesn't matter too much. You can always just press on the X to remove a modifier. So we're going to look at this in the edit mode for tab, and we want to create a arch in this foot, and we want to create basically a divot and then extend everything up to the top here. So how do you go about doing that? So what I'm going to do is extrude this up. And how do you do that? You press E. Press E to extrude it up. And how do you select all the points? You press A. Or, as I said, you can select over everything. So E to extrude. And then it will automatically bind it to the Z-axis, or whatever direction it is that it's extruding out of. And we're going to go upwards just a little bit. Now, you might say, this looks kind of like a pancake that's been mildly squished. Yeah, it's not exactly like an orthotic, and it's not very convincing. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix that. So subdivisions use things called creases to limit them to how much they are allowed to change a mesh. So if I press 2, which is 1, 2, and 3 are your options up here. If I press 2, it will go into edge select. So now if I clicked on an edge, instead of it like when we were manipulating it before, it was selecting vertices, so your vertex points, it will now select specifically edges. We're going to go into our edge select, and we're going to press Alt and click on this bottom ring. It's going to go around the object as much as it can to following its edge flow, and for some reason it didn't select this base one here, so I'm just going to select that myself by holding shift and then clicking on it. Just like you would with any application, if you want to remain selecting things for a period of time, you can press and hold shift while clicking on things. So now what we're going to do is in this end panel, in the items, because of course you can click on these to move between them, you're going to go to mean crease and then turn it to 1. So every edge that is selected is immediately bound to a 1 value increase. Now, I want to do this to a lot more than just those edges down the bottom there. So I'm going to press 2, go to my edge select, Alt click, this ring here, hold Shift and Alt, then click that, Shift and Shift, and I want to turn this mean crease into 1 as well. And of course, because this is a slidable value, you can just slide it all the way to the right and it will give it to you. So now, this has done what the solidify was doing exactly, except now, if I click on this and press G, I actually can give it its own custom thickness. So, first thing we want to do is we want to match the exact side profile of this orthotic. Now, this orthotic also has a lumpy boy underneath that is given to give me more support in my arch because I have collapsed arches. So, let's fix this. 3. This entire object is a little off. So, press A, that's your select everything tool, G, and then Z, and move it to a neutral as possible position. So I'm going to use the very tip of the orthotic as my neutral. So the first thing I want to do is hold Z, go to wireframe. This allows you to select entirely through the mesh. Go to 1 for your edge select, your vertex select, and click and drag over your base, and let's move it downwards. I'm going to move it downwards to as low as that heel goes, which is roughly around here. This is going to be non-exact science stuff here for a bit, and the reason for that is that you're going to have to do measurements afterwards to make sure it fits into a person's shoe. So I'm going to be doing an exact replica of the one I own and print it and see how it goes. So we'll see. Now, when we're in this view, the camera is lined up in such a way where you can select multiple of these at once. So when you're in 3, I can select 2 of these vertex points at once by clicking and dragging over them, and because we're in wireframe, it can select through the mesh. So what I'm going to do is click and drag over these points, and then line them up perfectly to the top of this outer coating on the orthotic. Click and drag over the 2 points. If you don't know if you selected both points, go into the other outside view, go back to 3, move it down. And yes, it will not look right at first, because it's literally going to be linearly moving between them. Those there, they aren't points. That's generated by the actual subdivision. So 3. These are roughly right enough, so I'm not going to change anything there. Now I'm going to select these 2 points here, and G and Z them up. G and then Z. G and then Z. I'm going to worry about the perfect shape of the actual subdivision afterwards, because that's what this is here. That's the subdivision, ignoring where my point is and just smoothing between these 2 here. But that doesn't matter. So click and drag over these. And this is going to be, as I said, a non-specific science. We're going to move that up to there. And as I also said before, when you click and drag over this, and Z up, notice how it changes that area there too, which is why you want to line it up first and then make your changes afterwards. G and then Z, G and then Z, and G, G and then Z. An astute person may wonder, why is the back of that particularly crumpled? Because the outer coating, obviously, which, as you can see, goes all around the back here. These pictures were taken at different times after I'd worn them and that sort of thing. So certain areas may look more crumpled. So to combat that as much as possible, I'm going to be moving this here. So this and its back piece, G and Y, I'm going to move them in a little bit. And let's just assume that the back does actually go the whole way, to around about there. Obviously making assumptions like this isn't great for consistency, but we'll see in time that it doesn't matter too much. Click and drag over these areas here, G, and then Y, and move it down. Now, this orthotic is made up in multiple parts because an orthotic, as I said before, is a non-exact science with some things. This piece here is glued on and increases the thickness and the amount of impact that my foot can take. But since we're 3D printing it, we want it to be an entire piece. We want everything to be in together. The only thing I'm going to probably ignore is going to be this brace piece here, and it will be something you can add on afterwards, after testing, to see if you do need it. So I'm going to click and drag over these. I'm going to move them over a little bit, but I don't want to move things off too much because it will start to mess with it. So you don't want to screw with it too much. Let's move out of X-ray and back up to here and have a look what the model looks like so far. So aside from the fact that it has no divot inwards, we're starting to get quite a nice shape. Still not as arched and sharp as you can tell there, but that's fine. Back to wireframe 3. So the next thing we need to do is we need to force this thing to conform perfectly to its shape. So ways you can do that is with loop cuts again. Loop cuts are a way to force the subdivision to actually conform to the shape that you made. So for instance, because that point is there and that point is there, let's add a loop cut here. Right click, click and drag over it, G and Z it up. Now, that arch is far nicer. Let's do it from multiple points. G, Z, click and drag, Z, Control R, click and drag over, and bring it down. And for the sake of having decent topology, I am actually going to add one more loop cut to the end here. So Control Z, not Control Z, sorry, Control R. Nope, I'm going to take that away because it screwed up the shape that I had going here. Hopefully with the stuff I do later, it won't matter too much, and I may have to shift some things. As I've said before, a lot of stuff isn't an exact science. No, it wants to work. Okay. So, let's move this point to match it as much as possible. We're going to try and just match the flow of the geometry as much as possible. And we'll be turning on a setting in a second that will make it so that this will actually conform correctly to the outer shape, but as of now it doesn't actually matter too much. So let's drop these down a tidbit, these down a bit. I'm probably going to do an average of these points, so about that much. The reason for it is not exact science, it's going to be fine. So, next things I want to do is I'm going to bring up this arch a little bit. So I can't see this picture properly, so I'm going to move off a little bit. And we're going to bring that arch to around about there. Move some stuff around. This stuff will all be tweaked in the end anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. Okay, I'm not too worried about that. So let's turn off our X-ray real quick and have a look what it looks like. So our baby steps are cleared. And the particularly hard stuff is over now. So now comes the part where we need to inset these faces here. And we want to do it in a smarter way. So in Blender, if you click on a face here and hold Control and click over on this face here, it will select the shortest path between those two things and select all those faces. So what we're going to do here is we're going to press I for inset. And what it's going to do is create faces inside of these faces. And we want to do it to roughly the thickness of about that. Not exact science. So that's starting to look good. Now, let's start to lower these. Okay, so we're going to insert one more time. And this is the one that's going to be the very base of the foot. So, let's look at press 7. Let's go into this settings here, and you'll see in the subdivision you'll have a bunch of things over here. This one here will turn off the actual subdivider from the viewport. This one here will allow it to be editable, and this one here is on cage. What this means is that it will force it to the shape of the actual object, and while it may look a little janker, it does still function exactly the same. So now what we need to do is we need to plot out where are the curves of the foot. So what we can do for that is we'll turn back on our X-ray mode, and we will see that there is a curve going like this. Now this part here is the arch support, and for my foot specifically, it's very, very strong. Like, I have a very strong arch support because my foot's buggered. So what we need to do here is we need to quickly just go into tool, where are we? Oh, doesn't matter. Okay, not in the tools. Go back to item. What we're going to do is we're going to go into annotate, and we're going to draw in the curves that we want. So I'm going to actually press tab, go out of edit mode. So I'm looking at this. Press H for hide, then going 7, and we're going to annotate in the details. So this annotate is practically just a texture that we can draw onto anything, and mind you, it is 3D too, which means it actually sits in 3D space. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw in the main curves of this as a guideline to follow. And due to the lighting of the photo I took, it's really easy to see where the main curves of my shoe happen. They happen along here. We have in here, oh, that's not good. Control Z, remember, just to get rid of anything. That, and if we look at it from the 3 view, we can see 7. We can see that's where it starts, which means that is roughly correct. You can look at it from different angles to see whether or not you're right or not. And on this side, the raised portion only roughly starts in about this area here. And then the rest of that is around like that. All this stuff here does not matter because it is going to be practically flat. Because it's the stuff that just sits in the shoe. This is the part that, even if you're 3D printing, it's probably going to be ground down by a sander wheel. So this stuff here is not important. It is the stuff that will stay the same consistency, the same thickness. As you can see by the side profile, it only roughly starts here. So yeah, there's a little, means that this arch does extend a little further forwards, but that doesn't matter. That's stuff that we're going to be changing anyway. So now that we've got our annotations for our general idea of how things are going to go, we can press tab, go back up to here and click on your selector. These annotations, you can't like change them or edit them. To get rid of them, you go click and hold down on the annotate, and you go to annotate eraser and get rid of things, which we will be getting rid of these eventually, but so let's go into our selector again, 7, Alt. Alright, so you can press Alt H to add everything back in, but I don't want these 2 images here to come back in. So what I'm going to do is just go into the outliner to the plane that was the orthotic and press View. So Now that we've got our annotation lines down, we have a pretty damn good idea. Not of height, but the shape that we need to go from. So back to 7, press on the object and press tab. Now, you may zoom back into annotate mode, which is kind of annoying, but that doesn't matter. Let's go back into here, click and hold down, go to annotate eraser, get rid of it. Go back into your editor, and the annotation's gone. These annotations will stay, however, as you will have to erase them to get rid of them. So the first thing we need to do is we need to ascertain a base height for everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my X-ray mode, I'm going to select this face, and I'm going to select all the way to the end here, and I want them all to be the same height. Now, an orthotic is not all the same height. This is stuff that will have to be changed as well. So we're going to press G and then Z, right? And we're going to move it downwards slightly. Then we're going to press S for scale and then Z. Now, if we scale this to 0 by pressing the number pad 0 or 0 on the numbers, and then pressing enter, these faces are now absolutely perfectly aligned with the Z-axis. And then what we can do is move them up a little bit, Z again, until the side of this orthotic is it doesn't extend any further than the orthotic. So now this person, we can assume, has a moat for a foot. That's not good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to give it some curve inwards to give us this shape here. So we're going to press 2, click on this edge here, go to 7, G, Z, and move it to the end point. Wow, what an uncomfortable looking orthotic. Let's keep going. 7, G, Y, Z. And notice how it keeps pulling the orthotic across? That means that we're going to have to be doing this in the actual vertex mode. So clicking and selecting over, making sure you're not in X-ray mode because you will select any back vertices, though there shouldn't be any, it will select them. So click and drag them to there, there. Now, this right here, because it's a curve, is actually affecting the other vertices, so don't stress too much. Click Z, and then move it over, then move it back. Other things will shift due to the fact that the mesh actually looks like this. When you limit it to it, other things will shift because it's affecting everything based on its curve. So we're going to make sure this stays on. And try and keep it as aligned as possible. Now that's making somewhat of a steep transition, but yet again, it doesn't matter. Okay, so now the person's foot will go in here and get sandwiched against this piece here. So let's fix that. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our X-ray mode again, 7. And you'll notice that I drew an outline on the outside here. If we press this and press hide again, I drew an outline that followed around the foot. This is when the curve is at its sharpest, basically. I just drew it to where it starts to begin to actually curve upwards and outwards back to its point here. So let's add that object back in and go back into edit. And we want to line these inners with that. So let's grab all of these, do it, control, and hold control and select through these, to this, to this. You can't do it all at once, otherwise it will select the shortest path that is not right. Let's lower them down on the Z-axis. I'm going to turn off the X-ray mode again. Starting to begin a bit more of a curve. These inners here have to be to that outer annotation. So 7 Z Z. So right now, the problem with this orthotic is that it is actually the same on this side and this side, which means that this part here is a lot sharper than it actually is. So to fix this, we go leave tab mode. Let's add that image in from before, not that one, the other one. This image here, and this image has a way better picture, though blurry because my camera sucks. It's a way better image of that side. So let's hide this one here, H3. Now, the 3 view will only show the image. And you think, oh, well, where's my model? Well, it's actually behind it. So when we press 3, press 9, and what 9 does is it flips whatever view is to the exact opposite of what it is. So if I press 9, we've got doink, and we can see that perfectly. So what we want to do here is we want to go into the X-ray mode, well not X-ray, sorry, the kind of see-through mode, and you'll see that the bottom of that image doesn't actually line up kind of at all with that. And that's yet again because that's just how the photo is. I can't fix stuff like that. So what we need to do is we need to make the photo the same as the orthotic as much as possible so that we can use that outer line there. How does one go about this? So what we want to do is when we're scaling this object, this image here to fit towards the model, we don't want to be scaling it on an axis just say like that. We want to be scaling the entire image at once so it's consistent in its scale. So I'm going to move this image to be as roughly the midpoint as possible and then scale it up. Move it a little bit more so that the edge of the tip, the very tip of the orthotic is touching the exact tip of the model, and the arse of this is perfectly lined up with it. So, boink. About that. And now we need to worry about height. So we're going to rotate it a little bit by pressing R. Move it down a little. And this part is a little fiddly, but I'm not going to worry too much about it because not exact science, it will be fine. Okay, you know what? That's good enough for me. Now what we're going to do is we're going to lower down this other side. So we press a tab on this object. We're going to press this, then look back at it because we realize that this is our sharp. I just pressed, if you remember, if you go out into object mode and press on your full stop key, it will automatically refocus you to the model. So it's not going to be a problem. You won't lose the model. So we press our 3 and then press 9 to flip it. Click on our object. Now we click and drag on that. It's going to select both points. So we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use object mode in translucent, turn it off. And what we can do is actually hide this portion of the mesh while we're going to be manipulating it. So what we're going to do is click on this point here and control click to this point here. It's going to select them all. No. Press 3. Pressing 3 will put you into face select. I'm going to click on this piece of the mesh. This one by shift clicking, then hold control and shift and click over to here and press H for hide. Now you've gotten rid of that part, but there's obviously a little bit more to go. So shift, click on that, control and shift, and then click all the way. Oh, went a little bit far. So what you can do is press Alt click and deselect that. So hide. Let's hide that portion of the mesh so we don't accidentally manipulate it. And 9. To side view, press 1 to go back into vertex select, and let's start lining up to this. And yeah, you may accidentally edit this piece here. You're just going to have to be pretty damn mindful and constantly recheck your angles. this right here, it's going to select both of them, so I'm going to go into that and then redo that. Not exact science. And if you don't want to follow it completely, like you can get rid of these as well, so click and then press H. That would actually be a pretty good idea too. Let's press 3 and then 9, and now you can manipulate it without having to worry about the editing of the back mesh. So let's move these down. Let's move that down, move that down. Move this up a tidbit. Move this down a little. Still fairly sharp, so 3 and the 9. Bring these down. Grabbing them both at the same time to try and not screw with their overall scale. See, as you can tell, it's a continuous graduation going upwards into the larger size. So, I think 3 then 9. I think this is starting to look like a pretty alright shape. Then, because we've removed half of this mesh by pressing H to hide it all, let's bring it all back. Alt, H. Adds the whole mesh back. So now if we go into turning X-ray mode off, we start to get a shape that's a lot more like an actual orthotic. It's pretty damn simple and is very, very bog standard. And to get a little bit more control over the depth of this arch, you can press on this and press G and then G again. So G is grab, then G again is called edge slide. So what we can do here is that we can actually edge slide pieces of this down to gain a little bit more control over it. So I just noticed something here, which is this is an ugly spot for a vertex. Let's bring it inwards a little bit. Starting to look better. Now, as I said, the arch begun to move upwards on this annotated line. So it would do us pretty damn good to start moving these vertexes back, turning off these ones sharp. So these lines right now are marked sharp. They are creased. So we need to turn that off. 0. We've got a much smoother shape. How did I do that? That was just the Alt ring select. So just hold down Alt and click and it will select it and reduce its crease value to 0. Now we're starting to have quite a nice looking orthotic. So let's do a quick look at it from the top and let's see how it looks. 7. Turn on your X-ray. So it's got that general line. It's going around. I noticed that there's not much heel on this side, so we're going to move it back over. Try and keep these lines as straight as possible. It's not exact science, but it will look nicer. So we're going to move this stuff to match the annotation a little better. Now, I don't like this crease being here. This specific crease is a little too strong. So let's move these lines back down here. And now it has a lot more shape. So this specific crease around here is a little too strong. So I'm going to go to edge select my 2, click on this edge here, control click to here, and then to here, and now I'm going to reduce the amount of crease to give it smoothness. I'm probably going to reduce it to 0, and we'll notice that it will have a much more rounded back. So I'm going to press 3 and check it on the height of the orthotic. Seems about right. This side is much higher in real life, so it is good. Starting to look good. Now, let's bring this these creases, so control click around, and then reduce them to 0 as well. This vertex here is a little bit of an odd bod, so I'm going to move him up a little bit. Now, if we look at this from the 3 and then 9 view, and then turn on our X-ray, we can see that's where the continuation is. And you can see that it's not perfectly lined up, depending on how much you want to make it perfect based off the reference. And obviously there's image distortion problems that will occur. You can change stuff here as well. Oh, see then? It's accidentally manipulated the wrong vertex. That's just because that's what you're going to have to deal with when you're doing on a side view like that. 3 and then 9. Okay. So your orthotic is mostly done. So let's turn off that. I'm going to leave it at this step because normally I would go around and I would be fiddling with it for like 2 hours. And we're going to work on the base of the actual orthotic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to bring in my other model of my other orthotic. If I go into my asset browser, go down to unassigned, and click on this here. Let's bring in my upper ortho and then scale it up. Let's scale and invert it. So scale X -1 to be the same. So on my original orthotic that I made it a lot sharper. So it is far, far sharper. I've got things like I didn't reduce the crease on this. I've realized that to fit a natural foot you would need less on the second version. The orthotic is a lot more extreme, and this edge is a lot more dulled. But that's honestly because I had more of an arch in the base here, because based off the reference image, if you look, I actually, when I was first modeling it, made it based off with this cutout in mind. So I'm going to go back, turn this back to an outliner, and I'm going to hide you. Let's go back to our 3, then 9, and we're going to change the shape of the base a little. I'm not really liking the fact that it isn't conforming very well, so we're going to make it more like an orthotic and not like the flat base of a shoe. So I'm going to add that other image in, not that one, other one, and I'm going to use this one as reference as it's far cleaner. Click on this one, press H for hide, 3, and let's start manipulating this mesh. So, if you look at this model, you can see there's some problems. This back piece seems right. That is about right. Now, these portions here, if I go into 3 view, go lower than like the average thickness of the actual orthotic. And the reason for that is that the entire orthotic has an arch in it already. So what we're going to do, if we're going to move these up a bit, move them up, turn off X-ray view to see what it looks like. Not liking that, going to Control Z that. Going to stabilize that out a little bit. Lower you down a tidbit to try and get this as flat and smooth as possible. Now, if I wanted to add a bit more of a lip guard to this, I could. To be honest, I would rather my orthotics have a bit more of a lip guard there, so I'm going to change this based off my original design, and I'm going to add a little bit more of a lip guard. This is so your foot is not tempted to slide off the orthotic. This is roughly where your pinky toe would be going, so I don't want to change that one too much. Okay, so the base shape of the orthotic is looking nice, so let's look at the side view, and let's start to change the bottom. So we want to turn this to that, click and drag over it, and we need to fit this to a rough shape of what it actually would be. So let's have a look. Better. Start to look better. Make sure that when you're selecting it, you're in the X-ray mode, otherwise you won't select the back vertices. I'm going to move these ones up a little. Make that a little flatter. Okay. Now, I had difficulties when I was measuring this. I was thinking, how am I going to measure something that has depth like this? And I thought of 3D scanning, I thought of all sorts of things to try and get the correct shape of the orthotic. But I ended up just settling on this. This sort of thing is not too bad. Not exact science, but it should work. Portions of the heel may need to be lowered depending on your style or whatever you're trying to do. The thickness of the end of this piece here does matter. Now, in this picture, it doesn't do it justice because it is actually thinner than it looks. So I will lower the thickness of this area here, and I'm going to be pressing Control and clicking across, then to here again, to here, and then to here, and then here. I'm going to lower it a bit. I want it to be just slightly thinner. Select these two vertices here and raise it up slightly. It didn't seem right. This right here is more than good enough for what we're doing here. So we're going to go to our annotate, we're going to go to annotate eraser, we're going to remove all these annotations. They are not important anymore. Boink, 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 boink. Then go back to here. Okay. So let's look at 7. Lining up perfectly. Pressing 3. Lining up just perfectly enough. Enough for what I'm trying to do. And it's starting to look good. Now, in Blender, there are feet that you can use, right? They are a reference model that you can get to add into your asset browser. And I force contorted a foot. So I'm going to be using a real 3D scan of my foot instead of just the base Blender one. But if you are practicing or you're doing this for something else, I would strongly suggest doing it based off one of these foot references. So let me scale up this foot a bit, and you would use this and you'd scale it out to the size of your foot, and then you continue on. Now, I would not suggest doing this because it's not your foot. You don't make an orthotic for someone else's foot if you don't know what their foot is. Like, there's no point. You're literally just pushing pushing shit up the water. So, do not do this. What you want is you want your actual 3D scan. So for me, I've got one. Let me go to downloads, and it is called... So I'm going to import this in. Actually, I'll do this the proper way. So let's go up to here to press import. We want to import STL. So the file format of my orthotic is in STL. So I used an online converter to turn a .wrl file into an STL file, which WRL is used for medical things, so it's pretty, yeah. But if you use a 3D scanning application, it may turn it into an STL, it might turn it into an OBJ file, it might turn into whatever. It doesn't matter, it's just you'll have to figure out how to import it. But in my case, I used an online converter to convert a .wrl file into an STL, downloaded it, and this is what it is. So let's grab the WRL file, which is the STL file, which is in my downloads, and it is called scanleft.stl. As you can tell, this mesh is disgusting. It's got holes, It's got no cap filling the entire thing, and in general, it is a very bad mesh. It's absolutely massive. I'm pretty sure it doesn't even have color data or anything, and as you can tell, this is not even to scale, and it's still absolutely colossal. So, what we're going to do is we're going to be turning this model into a usable model by remeshing it. So the first thing that we want to do is hold Z and go to wireframe, and you can see the geometry is terrible. But that is normal with anything that's 3D scanned. In fact, this is probably a fairly reasonable looking 3D scan compared to what I've normally seen. So, go into wireframe, press 3, go into your side view, press tab, click and drag until all the peaks of this foot are selected as much as possible. Now, if you look, I selected in a way where the flattest flat of the foot is selected, and then as much as the toe is selected as well. And as you see, it didn't select all the stuff that I wanted to select because I'm an idiot and didn't put it into that. Okay. 3. Let's select over the entire mesh. It is now selecting as much as it can. Now, I'm not very happy with that. It's not grabbing everything. So, 3, side view. This is why it is imperative that the foot is as flat in a neutral position as possible while you take a 3D scan. Now, you can do things to fix this. You can like rotate the foot, like if you were to rotate it just in normal ways to try and get as flat as possible. But yeah, please just get it as clean as possible. We're going to delete this stuff. So we're going to click Control Z and we're going to hit delete faces. Once these are all deleted, you'll be go to solid mode and you'll be left with this particularly ugly looking mesh. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using something called a remesh, and the remesh is going to create a voxel grid over it and then basically averages its positions and then reduces the quality of the model. Now we're going to lower the quality because all we want is the shape, not pixel precision. So right now, if you were to remesh it, it would turn into a hold full of mess because remesh cannot do something with like open geometry like this. This entire thing has got the top of it cut off. So, I have an add-on for this, so you will not have this unless you went and spent 60 bucks on an add-on. If you click on this edge, it selects the entire thing through. That is what the add-on's doing. But if not, you will press this. I guess it's doing it anyway. You'll press your control key and try and select along the rim of the top of this, and try your goddamn best to not let it do stuff like this. Though it shouldn't matter too much as long as the entire thing's sealed. So I'm going to use my add-on. Press F to fill. Fills in the entire face and makes this ugly ass geometry. But it doesn't matter because as long as there's no holes in it, the remesh should work. Then I'm going to go into the sculpting tab. It's currently selected on the wrong model. Screw us, zoom out. And we're now going to remesh. Now, the problem with remeshing is that you're just calling for disaster. A lot of bad stuff can happen. For instance, your computer can basically crash because the voxel size is too small. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a remesh modifier. Your computer's going to scream momentarily, and as you can tell, it's been remeshed. It's much finer and the entire object has actually been slightly smoothened over. So what we need to do is we need to increase the size of the individual voxels. As the voxels get larger, you have more performance per calculation. So now that the voxel size is pretty big, we're going to do it until that is perfect right there. So for the size of the model that I imported, this will be different for everyone's model, so do not take this as gospel. 2 meters, because this model is absolutely humongous. 2 meters is perfect. So you can go bigger and you can go smaller, but all in all, it doesn't matter. There's a little bit of geometry jank there, but that's alright. Now that it's been remeshed, we click this tab down here and press apply. We press tab and we look into the mesh, and this is what it looks like. That is a great mesh. It's not terrible, it's got lots of quads through it. Anyway, doesn't matter. Now, the size of this object is immensely humongous. So we want to make it smaller. So we're going to scale it down. Press your full stop key to relock to it. Scale it down, lock to it. Now, this object currently is scaling off this yellow point here. And see how that is not even remotely on the mesh? That's just a quirk of anything that's 3D scanned, is that the origin point, which is the yellow dot there, is always fried. So right click, we want to set origin to geometry. So that does the average position of the entire model. And you can do it inside edit mode to move the object onto the origin, but we're not going to worry about that. So I normally would have gone into the model, if the voxel size is too small, I would normally have gone into the sculpting tab, right? And then I would have held down shift and started to smoothen out portions of the mesh. And if shift doesn't work, you can go down over to here and press smooth. And you would use this to smoothen out the portions of the mesh that are still glitching out. But due to the fact that this voxel was so damn successful, like here's a part you could smooth, I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. So, go back to your layout, grab this. Now, you've got your dimensions written up here. This is perfect. This will show you exactly the size of the model. So, how large is your foot? For me, it's 28 centimeters because I'm under Hunter's foot. I'm going to go into my scene, go down to units, metric, you'll have unit scale, and we're going to go down, instead of length in meters, we're going to go down to centimeters. So this entire object is way too bloody big, so we're going to scale it down until it is 28 centimeters long. 28 centimeters on the z-axis. 28. So, which axes are we going to be basing its scale off? We hit scale and then press Y. This is the axis you want to be scaling off. But obviously you don't scale off the y-axis because your foot doesn't stretch like that. So it's currently the y-axis is 33 centimeters. So I'm going to reduce that until it's 28. Whoop, that's 29. 28. Notice how minuscule it is compared to the orthotic? We're going to have to do it to both of them. So these images now are useless. So we're going to hide them. Press H and they will get hidden. We're going to move this orthotic over until it's above, sorry, the foot model scan above the orthotic. Then the orthotic, you're going to do the same thing. So my orthotic was 30 centimeters long. So I'm going to scale this down to 30 centimeters. So all the way down to 30 centimeters. If you want to get more precision while you're scaling something, you press shift and it will move it by a lesser amount. So I'm going to go towards the center, scale, scale, and then it needs to be 30 centimeters. So see how it's a little hard to get that 30 number, which I did perfectly, of course. Hold shift and then it will be easier. Grab that foot scan, move it down to the model. Yeah, it's not perfectly lined up from the top, so let's move it over. Refocus to it, Z, and move it up. Now, you might be thinking, where does the foot scan come in? So, for an orthotic to work, it needs to fit into the neutral position of your foot. At least, this is as much as I know. I've talked to a podiatrist about it, and this is about as much as I know. So, we're going to try and fit this orthotic, this scan to the orthotic as much as possible, while not changing the scale. So, right now, this orthotic is clipping straight through the actual foot scan. And if we hold down Z and go to wireframe, you can see that the orthotic is actually clipping through the base here too. This is not good. So what I'm going to do is move it up just slightly, and we're going to be using something called a shrink wrap modifier. Let's click on this object, add a modifier, So go to your modifiers tab. Now, you do the shrink wrap modify after the subdivision, because it means that you can keep the same quality while also shrink wrapping. So you write in SHRI and you have a shrink wrap. So at first, nothing will occur because it has nothing to target. Click on the eyedropper. The eyedropper will then give you an option to source an object. If you don't want to press that, you can search it. Of course, I only have 2 objects here that are in the viewport that are selectable. So we'll click on this and click on that. See, right away, you notice there's something peculiar. The orthotic completely bloody disappeared. And that's because we need to dictate to the model what parts of the model are actually allowed to be stretched to it. Right now, the entire bloody model has stretched to the foot. There is a model there, it's just stretched to it. And that's not good, because you've just lost your entire model. So, we're going to turn this off, turn off the target, and what we're going to do now is click on this. Actually, I think I'll redo it and then do project. There we go. Select it to project, and now what's happening is that as soon as it finds an area that can connect, it will connect, which means that even the toe section is forcefully connecting up. Now, if I grab this orthotic here, you can see that the model actually forces itself to the shape of it, and not in a good way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something smart, which is where I'm going to go into this object right here. This is the object properties of the physical object that I'm selecting. Go down to viewport display, and then it says here display as, and hit bounds. Now this will turn off the object's physical properties that you can see in the viewport and turn it into something that is just a box showing its bounds. So this is how the orthotic scan is going to attach to the foot, is that we're going to be forcing the bounds down onto the object. Now, we can see some pretty clear and obvious problems here. Right now, we have a bunch of rogue geometry just glitching through it, stuff that we need to fix. So, first off, we need to make sure that this arch is not getting randomly clipped upwards. And what we can do is we can either move it upwards, or we're going to have to change the geometry of the actual orthotic. And the actual orthotic is probably the one that's going to have to be changed. So, let's grab T and then go into your bounds and then press H to we want to go back to object, click on this, shrink wrap, and then click on the remove from display for now. So right there, real time. So it shows what it's doing physically in the viewport at that right moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit some stuff. So this right now, this orthotic is right now the basis to any orthotic you make for anyone. You may change some certain things about it to make it so it can fit to other people's shoes, but this right now is the very core of your orthotic, which means that from this point on, it will be different for every person's shoe. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on and then off, oops, on and then off, and I'm going to discover which parts are the parts that are bugging out. So the very basis of this must be clipping. And now you can use a thing called a limit to tell how much it's allowed to take, but we're not going to be screwing with this, so we're going to hit right click on it and hit to reset to default value. We're going to bind it to the x-axis because we only want the x-axis to be influent. Looks good, but it's not what we want. Negative. I'm going to click on the negative button to tell that it needs to go downwards, so indent downwards. I'm going to grab this bounds, and now as we move the object, it should contort correctly. So, Z, and you'll see you'll start to have an influence of the toes. And you might think, but we don't want the toes to be affected. Because all in all, your orthotic is supposed to be about the heel. It's not supposed to be about the toes. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove them from the editing area. You might think, oh, well, I'll just cut the toes off. Well, you're not wrong. That actually totally would work. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a more robust solution that will solve later problems as well. So right now, there's a thing called a vertex group. Now, a vertex group is just it's a way of targeting the things that you want to actually affect, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to select this model. So go into your vertex select by pressing 1. And we want to tell it which areas we don't want it to influence. So I don't want it to influence anything that is below this area here, because downright would not be helpful. So in the vertex group, I'm going to select this area here and press Control and I to invert the selection that I made. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be dictating to it the parts it's allowed to affect. So we're going to now go down to vertexes, add a new vertex group, and we're going to be calling it Effectable. It doesn't actually matter what it is. You can call it even just base. Like, it doesn't matter. Press assign a weight of 1 to all of these. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that shrink wrap modifier and select base. Now it's only going to be affecting the areas in which the orthotic physically is touching it. So now even if I grab this and shift it forwards, you see how it doesn't even affect it. That area is no longer considered a viable area for it to be allowed to affect. And yeah, like, if you force it downwards, you can remove more and more. Now, I'm not OCD, but I don't like seeing hard lines like this. So what you can do is you go and click on that vertex and notice if you go down to blink, your base, reduce the value to 50% and assign. Then it's affected by the modifier by 50% of the original value. So if I go back to full and assign, it's 100% of the value. 50%, 0%. I'm going to assign 50% to make a form of gradient between it. Assign. Just so it isn't as hard and sharp downwards. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make this deeper. I don't like the look of this currently. I think that the orthotic needs to be more shaped to the foot. So right now it is not shaping correctly. It's right now too high and just doesn't look right. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower it down a little bit until the foot is affecting as much of the mesh as possible. I'm going to put it probably around there. Yeah, and we're going to go to your modifier and add another subdivision just in case. The subdivision will just force this to be very obvious. Now, what's happening here is that the mesh is clipping through and it's making it look really bloody ugly. So what we can do is change the base orthotic to fit to it better. So the first things that I'm going to do is, if I move these, it's not going to change anything. But these, however, if I roll these back, let's go back to the point select, and then move them. We have the actual contortion of the orthotic. So I'm going to go back into here. It seems to be there's still a little jank on this side, so we're going to go back to right-clicking on this. So when you go out into object mode, if you want to view what the model looks like smoothened or not, when you right-click on it, you'll have shade smooth, shade by angle, and shade flat. So typically when you're modeling, you sit in shade flat because it's essential. You need to see how your faces are looking. But once this is done, you won't need to. So we're going to move this all back a little bit. That seems a little too thin to me. So I'm going to leave there to be a bit of a transition between the stuff that is and isn't. Let's select this edge. See, this is me having trouble trying to select something. Let's just confine you to the x-axis. Gonna grab these points and just fill this area out a bit more. See, as you can see, the orthotic is affecting, so the foot scan is affecting this area here, and then only is touching this area again afterwards, leaving this area untouched, which means it isn't technically perfectly conforming to the foot. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to raise this up by pressing Z, and now it has a perfect shape of the actual foot. Yes, we do have this jank geometry on the sides, but they will get smoothed off. So any area in which that you can see a break occur, so that's where it's forcing through and looking ugly, we're going to change that. So I'm going to grab this edge here, there. I just caused myself a break, which means that I need to reduce its effect a little bit. We want it to be touching that foot as much as possible. Because after all, the orthotic is something that's organic, that's going to be touching your foot. It needs to be fitting and conforming. So I'm going to grab this whole edge and move it up. Okay. Starting to look pretty good. All of this is correctly conforming. I want this edge here to be less creased, so it's more swing to it. So right now, this foot scan is just about ready to go. We have a bit of a bug here, which I will go into the edit. Actually, I'll just select that entire face, and we'll go back to that vertex, give it a weight of 0 and assign, and it gets rid of it immediately. Anything that clips through, you just assign a 0 weight to it. And that's your orthotic done. So this might need to be changed depending on how you want your orthotic. So for instance, I think this orthotic's heel is still too high. So what you can do is you can grab your model, your scan, and you can rotate it. You can lower it down, and you can keep manipulating it until you get the thing that you want. So for me, I've already done all the legwork on my original foot model, so this is technically my second time doing it. And overall, you're done. So let's just hide this. Go to this. Now, this is the part where once you have made your shrink wrap, you can apply the modifier. So click this, hit apply. Oh, yeah, that was my fault. Okay. You need to do it in Q, so apply and then apply. Then you go into shading. Not shading, sorry, sculpting. And then you'll smoothen out these little bits by holding shift and then clicking. So you might accidentally do something like that, which you don't want. There we go. We're gonna smoothen out those chunkies. Yeah, that's ugly. So we're just gonna do... Mind you, this stuff does not matter. This is only just because I want it to look good. Yeah, a bit of a rogue vertice, but that's fine. Now, this is entirely 3D printable. Your entire model is done. Now, you can add things like heel supports, braces into the center. You can add all that stuff later, and it would literally be as simple as adding in a plane like you did to make the orthotic. Adding a subsurf, scaling it down. Let's just move it to here. Adding a solidify. Oh, other one. Solidify, giving it some loop cuts by subdividing it. Bring it over, Z. That sort of thing, and increasing the thickness. It doesn't matter how you do it, but it would literally be as simple as that, and then joining it onto it. That stuff you can search up if you want to know how to do that in Blender, and just search up Boolean, or you could just fit them together by using weld or something similar. But yeah, you're done. So thank you very much, and I hope your orthotic making adventures of avoiding a podiatrist is successful.